Hello again, this is UML Operator. All right, welcome back. This is part 3 of a multi-part series on simple web UI design. Call it simple because we're designing on a static site, not a lot of dynamic database access or control logic here. Pretty simple stuff, right? So in the last session, we started what we call a composite map, and we're going to continue that conversation by getting into using your map, Sitemap, to start developing requirements. So let's get into it. All right, first things first, the team had me change the name of the package from composite map to sitemap. I'm certainly good with that. I also changed the name of the folder, and we also came up here and changed the name of the navigation cell. Very simple to do in the navigation cells. Over in properties, when you select the cell that you want to rename, just go to the alias field in properties, and we changed the name to sitemap. So now everything's named sitemap, composite map, all the same thing to me, but the team is now happy. So let's look at the finished product. We're going to get to that point as we move forward. So we built out some requirements for layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3. And we built these requirements from inside the map elements, the UI elements that we use from the extended type. So when we go into this, I'm just going to go to layer 1, which is the home page. And we can see that in the dialog box under requirement, we created 3 requirements. Now we originally started in the element itself, and then we right-clicked on it, move external. We move them to a package or folder where we want to store requirements. So let me show you the steps of how we got to where we are right now. Before we get started, let's baseline our package. Always a good idea. We're going to go to the parent package in this particular case. Control Alt and B. We're going to bring up baseline. And the last baseline was on the 19th. This is date and time 03. We're going to create a new baseline 04. And then you could certainly overwrite the content here, the notes here, and write anything you want. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to hit OK. And it's going through and it's baselining this entire package within the SQL database that we're posting to. All right, that is done. I'm going to go ahead and hit close. We could certainly have shown a difference before we did all that work, but I already know when the last time we did it and we've made some changes. We just made changes by changing the package name, right, to sitemap. So that was one big change that we made. So now we have something we can fall back on if we make any mistakes, right? So what we did here was we started with a UI element and we started developing requirements. Now, before I get started from scratch here, you can develop your requirements offline. I mean, outside of, offline being you're outside of Sparks. Offline may also, you're not using the model, so you're offline from the model. You might be in another project in Sparks or somewhere else where you're developing a requirement. So let's look at our requirements. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the layer 1 requirements around the home page. So if I grab this requirement here and I go to sitemap and it's not locked and I hit Shift Insert and I paste this in, this requirement is traced from, realized from the home page, all right? So I can drag this around and I can do that. Right? But typically what I do, and what I'm going to show you in a moment, I'm going to delete it from the diagram, is I will, if I develop the requirements outside of the mapping exercise of the element, I'll bring the element in and then I'll draw realization from the element to the requirement. And if you remember from the traceability videos, what we're saying here is that this requirement is realized by this UI component. If I select this UI component, I'm saying the story that I'm telling is that the home page UI element implements these 3 requirements just by simply drawing this line. And in doing so, it's just another way, if I go to requirements, that this requirement is not internal, it's external to the UI component. So let me show you what we did here, how we did it, and you can do the same thing if you wish. All right, so we're over in our demo area for web design for this conversation. We have our sitemap up, just a few elements in here. Layer 1, Layer 2, Layer 3 in here. We're going to focus on Layer 1. So we're going to double click on the UI component to open it up. That'll bring up the property dialog box here. Another way to do that is select an element that you want to do and just hit Shift and then the Enter key, and it will bring up the dialog box. We're going to go in the dialog box on the left side. Under Responsibilities, we're going to select Requirement. There are no requirements in here. You've got status, difficulty, priority, stability, type, functional requirement. You can change the type. We're going to leave the default functional requirement in here. I wish there was a none. I could have this blank. You'll see that in a moment. And then we can start writing a requirement. Right, so we have created a requirement statement in the short dialog box. Long form, you could certainly type in anything you want. Don't get too carried away. But the pipeline widget, just going to bullet point this out. There we go. And hit save. And now we have a requirement in here of this type. Difficulty is probably low and simple with the platform that we're using. The priority is high. The stability is stable because of the domain and the tooling we're using. And the functional, display is probably better suited for the type here. Let's just go ahead and choose display. It's going to mean something in a moment. We're going to hit save. So now you can see the priority is high. This is internal. It hasn't been externalized yet, right? And we can go through and we can create more requirements. But before I do that, I know the numbering scheme we're using here. And it's REQ, R-E-Q, all caps, for requirement. And then the numbering scheme is 001, maybe a colon before or a dash before the description. But that's the convention that we're using. Now, those that have watched previous videos on auto numbering and auto generating, unfortunately, we can't do that when we're creating requirements in here. So you have to know what number you're going to start with and end with and manage those manually if you're going the method here and building the requirements from within an element. Now, it's very powerful to do it this way, and I'm going to show you a trick on how to apply auto numbering after the fact, right? So I'm going to take the number out of here, and we're going to, there we go, make sure it's clean. I don't need layer 1 because I'm starting requirements. I'm not sure whether it's layer 1 yet or not. Let's go ahead and do that, and we're going to hit save. Right? So now we've updated the requirement here. And if someone selects this, they go to requirements, they can see one requirement has been done and other formatting, hit save, apply, okay, there we go. Now let's say for a moment we've done all of our requirements across our elements. So I'm just going to do one for you. We're going to double click and open up the dialog box. We're going to go to requirements. We just have one requirement. You can pretend we've got more than one in here, and we want to move this external. So I'm going to right click on it anywhere in here. I get this pop up, move external. And then I get this dialog box that pops up that knows where I currently am in Sitemap and then gives me the ability to move where I want to go, right? And we want to go to our requirements repository or folder, and I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see here the indicator has been turned to external. Now this requirement is being managed externally from the element. All right, so I'm going to hit OK. We're going to go to where those requirements are, which is right here in the requirements folder. Go ahead, double click and open up requirements. Let's just drag and drop the requirement we created as a link, not an instant objects, but as a link. And we're bringing that in, and there we go. We have our requirement. Double click it and open it. We have any other details we wanted to do along with the requirement. The type is display. That didn't change. Status is still proposed. And then other data you can add. Difficulty is low. Priority is high. You manage now all the changes here. Manage this requirement from within this repository or this space as we're going forward. Now, if I go back over to Sitemap where we originally created it, and I drag and drop the requirement we just did as a link in, you can see that homepage is realizing or implementing this requirement. You go to traceability, there you go. Homepage right here in traceability implements this particular requirement. However, if I want to number my requirements, I have to manually come into them and then apply the convention. In this case, REQ, we're going to use a triple digit number starting with 001, and then we're going to have a suffix of layer 1 prior to the description, because we're talking about layer 1 requirements. If you're doing requirements outside of the element, and let's go ahead and bring this element into our requirements development space in here. I'm just going to hit Shift Insert. Here we go. And you can see we've already drawn realization from this UI element into the requirement. So we're stating that the home page implements this requirement. If I want to bring another requirement in here, I'm in the requirements diagram tooling type. I can drag a requirement in, and if I have auto naming and numbering on, it names and numbers it to the form that I wanted to use. And you all remember how to do that, right? You go to settings, auto names and numbers. You just simply find requirement element. I'm going to hit R to go down this stack to get to requirement. And you can see that we set a prefix of REQ with a space, a counter of, now it's on 003 because it incremented. That next one will be 003, and a suffix, space, layer 1, and should be a space after that. Let me just do something like that. All right, save and close. So the next requirement that comes in that we're writing will be auto numbered for us. But let's say you don't have auto naming and numbering on, and you're just very quickly creating requirements. With the team, you're not numbering, you're just dumping them into a model space as you're rapid firing out scope, all right? And you want to come back later and you want to auto number these separately. So how do you do that? So we have our 3 requirements and we know what folder we're in. We're in this folder here called requirements right here. So the first requirement we created was internal to this UI component, and it gave it a stereotype of display. All right, I'm going to show you something here. So when you go into the design tab, you go to manage, you can select auto naming, and it knows what package I'm on. I'm on the requirements package, and it sees I have 2 requirements that are available for auto naming. Well, I have 3 requirements in here. Why is that? And so the reason for that is it already has a stereotype that doesn't match the auto naming and numbering. It needs to be blank. In here, we'll get to configure auto naming in just a moment. What we're going to do is we're going to cancel this. We're going to open up this dialog. We're going to go to display type here, and we want to change this stereotype from display to something else. So how do we do that? So in this requirement dialog box, you see it has a type of display. So when you're looking over in properties, we're going to go ahead and cancel this. That in properties in the UML Sparks database is stereotype. So I can select the triple dots. I get this dialog box pops up. I'm going to uncheck display and hit OK. And now that stereotype is not there to get into the way of using diagram tab, manage, auto naming. Look at this. Now it sees all three of them. So I want to select all three of them, and I want to use the convention. And you can see here, it's starting at requirement 003, and it's going to auto name them to 05. That's not what I want to do, right? So I'm going to go down here, configure auto naming. I'm going to select the type, which is going to be R for requirement. To get down this long list, you can see that the next one starts at 3. I want it to start at 1. Prefix is fine. The suffix is fine for now. And I'm going to hit apply, create. I don't need to because it's going to automatically apply with the technique we're using. But I'm going to check it for future use after I'm done here and I'm ready to go. Now let's look at it. Check. There we go. All right. So if you're not seeing it when you're coming back up as you just saw there, you can uncheck, check again. It'll refresh. It's picking up the right numbering convention. If we have sub packages, we'll include that. I unchecked it. I'm going to hit refresh. There we go. Everything's back on. So this update name and alias, prefix, auto name, and current name. All right. So I want to prefix the auto numbering to the current name. So I like using this one. Same thing goes with the alias. Now not using an alias, but if I did, it would do the same thing. Prefix the auto alias to the current alias, right? So if you go into configure, you can set up the same or different for alias. And I'm not going to cover that in this subject. All right. So we're going to refresh again. There we go. This is what it's going to look like. There's no alias to preview. It's going to go through, hopefully, auto name all of those. Hit OK. There we go. Now we've got auto naming and numbering applied. So you can do it either way. If you started it inside it and you auto numbered it manually, using the technique design, manage, auto numbering, it's not going to pick it up. All right. As you saw earlier, it's not going to pick it up, but you want to make sure that when you're auto naming that you start at the number you meant to. Now that can be pretty dangerous in a large project with a lot of team members because everyone's playing around with auto naming and numbering, and you've got to be careful on what you're applying or not applying. So just learn both of them. It's just going to make it easier to do it. I like to create my requirements outside of the elements, but sometimes when you're in the element and then there's other intelligence that's under the element, it just makes it easier. And also, if you're developing requirements from scenarios, that can be very powerful. You're looking at models. You might want to create the requirements inside the element. I tend to have my map off on the side. We're writing requirements to the elements as we're progressing. Like we're starting on the home page. This is our first requirement. Now we're on the second requirement. All I'm going to do now is just come in and say, yep, this is realizing this requirement, and this one's realizing this requirement, and going from there. So let me do that again. There we go. And it's picking it up. Now you can see when traceability is on that the home page is realizing these 3 requirements, which were created in 3 different ways. So I hope that was helpful in understanding how we got to all of the cool requirements that we developed. Navigation here, requirements. That's how we created these requirements. And let's go to the sitemap for all of the elements that we did. We haven't completed it yet. We're not done, but you can see that on each one of these elements, we've gone through and we've created requirements as far as we have gotten so far in this demonstration for our sitemap. So we have progressed through our sitemap. We're not done yet, but we progressed through it. We got through some requirements elicitation exercises thanks to the work that we've done with the UI components in the sitemap. We have drawn realization, stating that each UI component is implementing a requirement that we developed. We developed requirements inside each element as well as outside of each element. So you learn how to bring up the requirements out of responsibility. You learn how to create them inside the elements. You learn how to externalize them so that you're able to look at the realization. So these are external to the element. If I double click again on this element, because I've drawn realization, it is showing that they're associated, they're relevant to this UI component. If I did not have the realization implementation as an external requirement, they would not show up in the requirements metadata for the particular element. They wouldn't show up here if they did not have the realization. So we learned how to do that. I didn't go through all the layers, but we continue to develop requirements. In our next session, we are going to get into reporting and analytics. Now, reporting and analytics is going to be very simple level. We're going to do two charts on our requirements, what's been proposed versus approved, implemented, mandatory. We're going to go through some analytics. We're going to use a model document element to create reporting. So a solution analysis report, requirements development report. This is a very fast way to join packages that you want to report on and use templates, whether you're using the model report template or custom templates. We're going to talk about that next session. All right. So until then, happy modeling.